Flight attendant blocks black doctor from helping dying man. Then FBI instantly boards. The plane help. He's not breathing. The scream tore through the hushed atmosphere of first class, slicing through the steady drone of jet engines and the gentle clink of crystal glasses. Eleanor Wilson's voice cracked with terror as she watched her husband's body go rigid in his seat. James Wilson, 64. A man whose presence commanded boardrooms and whose signature authorized billion-dollar deals now slumped forward, his complexion rapidly shifting from flushed to ashen. His eyes, usually sharp and evaluating, rolled back, revealing alarming white crescents beneath half-closed lids. James, please. Eleanor clutched at his arm, her manicured nails digging into the fine fabric of his custom suit. The champagne flute he'd been holding tumbled from his fingers, shattering against the polished floor. Amber liquid splashing across the pristine carpet like spilled gold. The first-class cabin of Flight 427, bound from Atlanta to San Francisco, had been quiet luxury just moments before. 12 spacious leather seats arranged in 3 rows, soft lighting casting a warm glow over wooden accents and brushed metal. A sanctuary of privilege at 37,000 feet. Now it was chaos. A flight attendant rushed forward, her practiced smile faltering as she took in the scene. Behind her, passengers turned in their seats, some rising halfway, uncertain whether to help or stay back. My husband, Eleanor, cried out again. Something's wrong with his heart. He has a stent. Please, someone help him. James's body convulsed once violently. His breathing turned shallow, then ragged, each inhale a desperate fight. His skin, now gray and clammy, glistened under the cabin lights. Around them, passengers reacted with varying degrees of horror and helplessness. A young woman across the aisle covered her mouth with her hand. An elderly man fumbled for his call button. 2 business executives exchanged alarmed glances, their laptops forgotten. Eleanor, now on her knees beside James's seat, looked up with wild eyes at the faces surrounding her. In that moment, she wasn't the wife of investment firm founder James Wilson. She wasn't the former art curator who had organized exhibitions viewed by royalty. She was simply a woman watching her husband of 37 years die before her eyes. Please, she sobbed, her voice breaking. He was fine just a minute ago. We were talking about our granddaughter's recital next week. Her trembling hands moved to his face, cupping his jaw as if trying to will life back into him. James, stay with me. Don't you dare leave me like this. The primary flight attendant hovered uncertainly, her training covering medical emergencies, but nothing preparing her for the raw desperation in Eleanor's eyes. Ma'am, I'll get the medical kit. Does anyone know CPR? But James was deteriorating rapidly. His lips had taken on a bluish tinge and his chest movements grew more erratic. Each second seemed to stretch agonizingly as the gravity of the situation settled over the cabin like a weight. He's having a heart attack, a businessman stated loudly from the second row, as if naming the crisis might somehow contain it. Eleanor's sobs turned to keening, a primal sound of fear. She had watched this man build empires, weather financial storms, raise children with unwavering strength. Now his life was ebbing away under the impassive glow of reading lights and the steady vibration of engines carrying them through the night sky. Is there a doctor? The flight attendant's voice rose with increasing urgency. Is there a doctor on this flight? James's body gave a final shudder. Then his chest stopped moving entirely. I'm a doctor. Let me through. The voice cut through the panic, calm, authoritative, and certain. Doctor. Elijah Reynolds unbuckled his seatbelt and rose from seat 4A, his movements efficient and deliberate. At 43, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to making life or death decisions daily. Elijah wore no white coat, just a navy button-down shirt and charcoal slacks. His presentation at the International Cardiology Conference in Atlanta just hours earlier had been in formal attire, but he'd changed for the flight home, seeking comfort for the 5-hour journey back to San Francisco. "I'm a cardiologist," he added, already reaching for the overhead compartment where his carry-on contained a personal medical kit, a habit developed after years of being the unexpected responder to emergencies in restaurants, on planes, at theaters. Elijah's mind was already cataloging what he was seeing: the patient's age-apparent symptoms, the rapid progression. His training transformed the chaotic scene into a series of clinical observations and potential interventions. As his fingers closed around his medical bag, a flash of memory intruded, standing in the emergency room of Memorial General Hospital, dressed in scrubs with his ID badge clearly visible, being stopped by a security guard asking if he was delivering something. Or the time a patient had refused his care, demanding a real doctor despite Elijah's position as chief of cardiology. Or just last month being mistaken for a hospital technician while examining a patient despite the embroidered title on his lab coat. The memories weren't just professional frustrations. They were part of a continuous thread woven throughout his life. Growing up in Oakland as the son of a postal worker father and teacher mother, Elijah had learned early that he would need to work twice as hard for half the recognition. His father's words echoed in his mind. Excellence leaves no room for doubt. He had carried that philosophy through Howard University's pre-med program and Johns Hopkins Medical School, where he'd graduated at the top of his class. It had guided him through his residency at Mayo Clinic, where patients would sometimes request the doctor in charge while he was standing right there, chart in hand. Elijah pushed those thoughts aside. They were familiar companions throughout his career, but right now they were irrelevant. A man was dying, and every second mattered. He moved forward confidently, medical bag in hand. "Sir," he addressed James directly, though he could see the man was unconscious. "I'm Dr. Reynolds. I'm here to help you." It was force of habit speaking to patients even when they couldn't respond. Eleanor looked up at him, hope flaring in her tear-filled eyes. "Please save him," she whispered. Elijah nodded once, his expression serious but reassuring. "I'll do everything I can, ma'am. I need space to work." His voice was steady, his Georgia accent barely detectable after years in California. The passengers around them backed away, creating a small clearing in the confined space. Elijah's focus narrowed to the man before him. James Wilson, now completely unresponsive. No visible breathing. Elijah set his bag down and quickly checked for a pulse at James's carotid artery. His fingers pressed with practiced precision, seeking any sign of life. His expression didn't change when he found none, but his actions accelerated. "Sir is unresponsive with no pulse," he announced clearly. "I need to get him on the floor for CPR. Can someone help me move him?" This was familiar territory for Elijah. While some doctors went entire careers without performing CPR outside a hospital, Elijah had done it 7 times, twice in restaurants, once at a basketball game, once on a hiking trail, twice on planes, and once in a parking garage. Each time, the initial reactions had been the same: surprise at seeing him take charge, followed by relief when his expertise became evident. As 2 male passengers moved to help, Elijah was already planning his next steps. The cramped confines of an airplane cabin were far from ideal for resuscitation efforts, but he'd worked in worse conditions during his residency. "Does the aircraft have an AED?" he asked the flight attendant hovering nearby, referring to an automated external defibrillator. "Yes, in the front galley," she responded. "Get it now," Elijah instructed, "and bring the emergency medical kit as well." His hands moved to loosen James's tie and collar, preparing for what was to come. In his mind, a timer was already running. 4 to 6 minutes until brain damage became likely. Every second critical. "I'm going to save you, sir," he murmured quietly to James as they prepared to move him to the floor. "Just stay with me." Allison Parker strode down the aisle toward first class, her movements brisk and efficient. 25 years as a flight attendant had honed her ability to navigate the narrow confine with precision even in turbulence. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a perfect French twist, not a strand out of place. Her navy uniform was impeccable golden wings pin gleaming under the cabin lights. At 52, Allison was a veteran of the skies. She had witnessed births and deaths, proposals and breakups all at 35,000 feet. She had survived industry upheavals, bankruptcies, mergers, and the constant pressure to remain youthful in a profession that often valued appearance over experience. Her perfectly maintained smile concealed the toll of decades standing on her feet of radiation exposure from countless flights of dealing with increasingly entitled passengers. When the call came from first class about a medical emergency, Allison's first thought wasn't panic, it was procedure. Airlines had protocols for everything, and medical emergencies were no exception. The rules were clear, and they existed for good reasons. Reasons Allison knew all too well. 6 years ago, on a flight from Chicago to London, a passenger had collapsed with stroke-like symptoms. A man had immediately identified himself as a neurosurgeon, and Allison's colleague had stepped aside relieved to have expert help. The doctor had administered something from his own bag to the passenger. Only later did they discover he was no physician, just a pharmaceutical sales representative with basic medical knowledge and a dangerous level of confidence. The passenger had suffered complications that might have been avoided with proper protocol. The aftermath had been devastating. Her colleague was terminated. The airline faced a multi-million-dollar lawsuit, and Allison herself had been called to testify about proper procedures. The memory still haunted her, the patient's pale face. The panic when they realized the doctor had given an inappropriate medication, the feeling of powerlessness as they diverted for an emergency landing. Never again, she had promised herself. Protocol exists for a reason. Since that day, Allison had become a stickler for verification. Procedure wasn't just bureaucracy. It was protection. The airline had tightened its policies afterward, requiring documentation before allowing passengers to provide medical assistance. Allison had testified in the lawsuit that followed, watching her colleague's career implode. She had vowed never to make the same mistake. But there was another layer to Allison's rigid adherence to Protocol 1 she rarely acknowledged even to herself. Growing up in a small Minnesota town with little diversity, her mental image of authority figures, especially doctors, had been shaped by limited exposure. The physicians she'd known were primarily older white men, and despite years working in multicultural environments, those unconscious associations remained buried deep beneath her professional demeanor. As she approached the scene in first class, Allison took in the situation with practiced efficiency. Elderly male passenger on the floor, apparent cardiac event, panicked wife, and a man kneeling beside the patient already taking charge. Her eyes narrowed slightly. The man, black, early 40s, wearing casual clothes, didn't fit the image that flashed in her mind when she thought doctor. It wasn't something she would ever admit aloud, but the unconscious association was there, buried beneath years of conditioning. She'd expected someone older, perhaps, or wearing something that signaled authority. Someone who looked like the doctors she'd grown up seeing, who resembled the physicians who treated her parents. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "I'm the senior flight attendant on this aircraft." "What's happening here?" Elijah didn't look up. His attention focused on James. "Passenger in cardiac arrest. I'm Dr. Elijah Reynolds, cardiologist. I need the AED immediately." Allison's posture stiffened slightly. "Sir, I understand you're trying to help, but we have procedures for medical emergencies. We need to verify credentials before—" "There's no pulse." Elijah interrupted, his tone unchanged, but his words carrying urgency. "Every second matters. Get me the AED now." Allison felt a flash of indignation. In her cabin, she was the authority figure, not this man who hadn't even made eye contact with her. Her hand moved to the communication device at her belt. "I'll need to see some identification first," she insisted. "We can't just allow anyone to—" "He's a doctor," Eleanor cried out, her voice ragged with fear. Please let him help my husband." Allison's gaze flicked briefly to Eleanor, then back to Elijah, who was now positioning James's head to clear his airway. "I'm starting compressions," Elijah announced, moving into position. "Someone time me. 30 compressions, then 2 breaths." Allison stepped closer, her voice dropping to a stern whisper. "Sir, you need to stop. We have protocols in place. The captain needs to be notified, your credentials verified. We can't risk." "What we can't risk," Elijah replied finally, looking up at her with steady eyes, "is wasting critical minutes on paperwork while this man dies. I've identified myself as a physician. Under Good Samaritan laws, I'm protected to provide emergency care. Now either help me save this man's life or step aside." For a split second, doubt flickered through Allison's mind. What if he really was a doctor? What if her insistence on protocol cost precious minutes? But the memory of that London flight resurfaced immediately, the lawsuit, the termination, the passengers' suffering. Allison's jaw tightened. Throughout her career, she had encountered passengers who thought rules didn't apply to them. First class was full of them, men and women accustomed to deference to exceptions being made to doors opening at their approach. She had developed a polite but firm resistance to such expectations. But something else was at play here, something she wasn't fully conscious of. When she looked at Elijah, she didn't see the chief of cardiology at Memorial General. She didn't see the doctor who had pioneered a new stenting technique that had saved hundreds of lives, or the physician whose research had been applauded just hours earlier at a prestigious conference. She saw a threat to her authority, a disruption to procedure. And perhaps, though she would never acknowledge it, she saw a black man who didn't fit her preconception of a medical expert. "Sir," she said, her voice hardening, "I need you to return to your seat. Our trained crew will handle this emergency according to protocol." The cabin had gone silent, the only sound the rhythmic compression of Elijah's hands against James's chest. Allison's hand closed around Elijah's shoulder. "Sir, I won't ask again." Isabella Rodriguez leaned forward in her seat, recognition flashing in her eyes. At 36, the trauma nurse from Miami General Hospital had worked alongside enough physicians to recognize the practiced movements and authoritative calm of a doctor in action. She had seen those same efficient hand placements and heard that focused tone countless times during code blues and emergency room crises. "He knows what he's doing," she murmured to herself before raising her voice. "I'm a trauma nurse. He's performing CPR correctly." Isabella unbuckled her seatbelt and stood, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her olive complexion flushed with the sudden rush of adrenaline. She wore simple jeans and a floral blouse, clothes chosen for comfort on the long flight back from visiting family in Atlanta. Nothing about her appearance screamed medical professional, yet her confident movements told a different story. Her own experiences with bias in healthcare colored her perception of what was unfolding. As a Hispanic woman in a Miami hospital, patients had sometimes mistaken her for housekeeping staff despite her credentials and uniform. She'd learned to assert her expertise firmly, but without defensiveness, a balancing act she witnessed now in Dr. Reynolds' interactions with the flight attendant. Across the aisle, Thomas Miller shifted in his seat, his weathered face creasing with concern. At 61, the retired paramedic had responded to thousands of emergencies during his career with Boston Emergency Services. His trained eye immediately assessed the situation: passenger in cardiac arrest, CPR in progress, flight attendant creating an obstacle rather than facilitating care. Thomas wasn't immediately convinced by Elijah's claim. In his decades of emergency response, he'd encountered a few phonies, people who exaggerated their qualifications in a crisis. But within seconds of watching Elijah's technique, his skepticism vanished. The hand position, compression depth, the clear commands. This was no amateur. "Christ," he muttered, running a hand through his silver hair. "Lady, let the man work." He began to rise from his seat, his instincts to assist still strong despite having hung up his uniform 3 years earlier. 2 rows back, Sophia Keller was already recording with her phone. The 42-year-old civil rights attorney from Seattle had developed a reflex to document potential injustices after 15 years representing clients in discrimination cases. Something in the interaction between the flight attendant and the doctor had triggered her professional radar. "This isn't right," she whispered to the businessman seated beside her. "That flight attendant is obstructing emergency medical care." Her free hand reached into her bag, fingers finding her business card by touch, a habit formed from years of being prepared for unexpected legal situations. Miguel Dominguez, seated in the last row of first class, watched with wide eyes. At 27, the second-year medical student had only practiced CPR on mannequins, never witnessed it performed on a real person in crisis. He recognized the textbook technique the doctor was using, and felt simultaneous awe at the calm precision and terror at the reality of a life hanging in the balance. "I should help," he said quietly, gathering his courage. His clinical rotations hadn't prepared him for this, but his basic training could still be useful. He began mentally reviewing the steps for operating an AED, preparing to offer assistance if needed. The son of Mexican immigrants, Miguel had fought hard for his place in medical school. The doctor's commanding presence, despite being challenged, inspired him. This was the kind of physician he aspired to become. Evelyn Nelson observed the unfolding drama with a mixture of concern and recognition. At 70, the retired high school principal had lived through enough history to recognize the subtle currents underlying the confrontation. She had marched in the 1960s, had fought to integrate her school district in the 1970s, and had spent a lifetime recognizing the quiet indignities imposed on people based on appearance. She wouldn't be stopping him if he looked different. Evelyn noted softly, her voice carrying only to the passenger beside her. Her arthritic hands gripped the armrests as she leaned forward, determined to bear witness to what was happening. Nearby businessman Jonathan Wells, 58, shifted uncomfortably. "The flight attendant is just doing her job," he muttered to no one in particular. "There are procedures for a reason." His law and order instincts sided with established authority, even as his concern for the unconscious passenger created internal conflict. These passengers, each with different backgrounds, different expertise, different perspectives, became the impromptu jury to the unfolding drama. They saw what others missed, the subtle shift in Allison's posture when Elijah identified himself, the dismissive glance, the hand placed on his shoulder, not in support, but in restraint. Isabella was the first to move, her professional instincts overriding the social conditioning that typically kept passengers in their seats during disruptions. "Excuse me," she said, stepping into the aisle. "I'm a trauma nurse. I can verify that this man is performing proper emergency medical care. The patient needs immediate attention." Thomas joined her, his voice carrying the authoritative tone developed through decades of emergency response. "I'm a retired paramedic. That man needs the AED now, not in 5 minutes after paperwork." Sophia continued recording but called out, "Ma'am, preventing emergency medical care could constitute negligence. I'm an attorney, and I'm documenting this incident." Miguel approached tentatively. "I'm a medical student. I can help with the AED when it arrives." Evelyn's voice rose above the others, clear and cutting. "Young lady, would you be questioning this doctor if he were white? Think carefully about your answer." Jonathan stood as well, creating a counterpoint. "Let's all calm down. I'm sure the airline has protocols in place for everyone's safety." Allison Parker found herself suddenly surrounded, her authority challenged from multiple directions. Her hand dropped from Elijah's shoulder as if burned. In the center of this constellation of witnesses, Elijah continued, compressions his focus unwavering. "I need the AED," he repeated, not looking up. "This man's heart has stopped. We're running out of time." James Wilson lay unresponsive on the floor, his life depending entirely on the stranger kneeling above him, a stranger being prevented from delivering the care that might save him. Eleanor clutched her husband's hand, looking between Elijah and Allison with desperate, pleading eyes. "Please," she begged. "Let him save my husband." The first-class cabin had become more than a section of an aircraft. It was now a battlefield where prejudice and procedure clashed against expertise and urgency, with a man's life hanging in the balance. "Sir, return to your seat. We will handle this." Allison's voice cut through the cabin, sharp as a scalpel. Her right hand remained firmly on Elijah's shoulder, applying just enough pressure to communicate authority without appearing aggressive to onlookers. Elijah didn't stop the rhythmic compressions on James's chest. Each press was precise, delivered with the exact force and tempo that medical studies had proven most effective. "I'm a cardiologist," he stated again, his tone controlled despite the urgency. "This man is in cardiac arrest. He needs immediate defibrillation. His heart has stopped beating effectively." Sweat had begun to bead on Elijah's forehead, evidence of the physical exertion required to maintain proper CPR. Still, his voice remained steady. "I need the AED now. He has minutes, perhaps less." Allison's lips thinned to a tight line. "Anyone can claim to be a doctor. We follow procedure." She glanced toward another flight attendant hovering nearby. "Lisa informed the captain we have a medical situation. We'll need to verify credentials before proceeding with any treatment." The younger flight attendant hesitated, her eyes darting between Allison and the unconscious passenger on the floor. "But Allison, he looks really bad." "Procedure. Lisa," Allison repeated firmly. "Get the medical kit, but hold the AED until I authorize its use." For a brief moment, Allison's resolve wavered. She flashed back to her training, which emphasized that in true emergencies, medical care should proceed while verification happens in parallel. But the memory of that London flight, the lawsuit, her colleague's termination, her own testimony overrode everything else. She couldn't risk another imposter. Eleanor Wilson surged forward, her elegant composure shattered by desperation. Her hands clutched at Allison's sleeve. "Are you insane?" "My husband is dying. Let the doctor help him." Allison gently but firmly disengaged Eleanor's grip. "Ma'am, please stay calm. We're trained for these situations. We need to follow proper protocol to ensure what Elijah interrupted his rhythm on James's chest, never faltering. "That this man dies while you verify my medical license? He's in ventricular fibrillation or asystole. Without defibrillation, his survival chances drop approximately 10% with each passing minute." Murmurs rippled through the cabin as passengers processed this information. Someone whispered, 10% every minute. That's insane. James's body remained motionless beneath Elijah's compressions. His skin had taken on a grayish-blue tinge, and a thin line of saliva had escaped from the corner of his mouth. His once immaculate suit was now rumpled, his custom French cuffs stained with the champagne that had spilled during his collapse. Eleanor fell to her knees beside her husband's head, stroking his silver hair with trembling fingers. "James, please hold on. Don't leave me." She looked up at Allison, her eyes burning with a mixture of fear and fury. "My husband built hospitals. He donated millions to medical research, and now you're blocking the one person who might save him." Allison maintained her position. "I understand you're upset, Mrs. Wilson, but—" "You understand nothing." Eleanor's voice cracked with emotion. 40 years together, and you're standing there spouting rules while he slips away. Thomas Miller pushed forward from his seat, no longer content to observe. "I was a paramedic for 30 years, miss. That man's performing textbook CPR. You need to get the AED now." Allison glanced at Thomas, taking in his appearance. Casual clothes, silver hair-lined face, and seemed to give his words more weight than she had Elijah's. "Sir, I appreciate your input, but I'm responsible for following what Isabella Rodriguez stepped closer. I'm a trauma nurse, and what you're doing right now isn't protocol, it's negligence. That doctor is trying to save a life. The cabin seemed to shrink as tension expanded to fill every cubic inch of available space. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some averting their eyes from the drama, others unable to look away. The low hum of the engines provided an ominous backdrop to the confrontation. Elijah had been performing compressions for over a minute now, and despite his excellent physical condition, the effort was taxing. "I need someone to take over compressions while I check his airway," he announced, his clinical mind still methodically working through the emergency algorithm drilled into him through years of training. Before Allison could object, Isabella stepped forward. "I can take over." "Sir, you need to stop this," Allison insisted, her voice rising slightly. "You have no authorization to—" Ma'am Elijah finally looked up, meeting her eyes directly for the first time. His gaze was intense, focused, but not angry. "My name is Dr. Elijah Reynolds. I am Chief of Cardiology at Memorial General Hospital in San Francisco. This man has approximately 4 minutes before irreversible brain damage begins. I am not asking for permission to save his life. I'm telling you what I need to do so." Something flickered across Allison's face. Uncertainty, perhaps, or the first inkling that she might be making a catastrophic mistake. But training and deeply ingrained biases reasserted themselves quickly. Her spine straightened. "We need a real doctor," she said, the emphasis on real so subtle it might have been missed by someone not attuned to such linguistic markers. But it hung in the air, heavy with implication. In that moment, a memory flashed through Elijah's mind. His first day as a cardiology attending being stopped by hospital security, despite wearing his white coat with Chief Resident embroidered on it. The familiar anger rose hot and sharp, but he pushed it down just as he always did. This wasn't about him. It was about James Wilson. Miguel Dominguez, who had been watching nervously from the periphery, suddenly spoke up. "I've seen him before I attended his lecture on interventional cardiology last year at UCSF. That's Dr. Reynolds." Elijah didn't acknowledge the support, his focus entirely on James. "Airway is clear," he reported after checking. "Isabella, take over compressions. 30-2 ratio, push hard and fast." Isabella smoothly took Elijah's position, her hands finding the correct placement on James's chest with practiced ease. Elijah moved to James's head, monitoring his breathing and pulse points. "Where is the AED?" he demanded again, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to commanding emergency rooms. Every second matters. Passengers had begun to record the scene on their phones. Sophia Keller's legal mind was already cataloging potential charges: negligence, reckless endangerment, possibly even civil rights violations, if she could establish that Elijah's race factored into Allison's obstruction. Allison stood her ground, though her certainty had begun to waver. The captain needs to be informed before he's not breathing anymore. Eleanor's anguished cry cut through the tension like a physical blow. "Oh God, James, please." Elijah's fingers pressed against James's carotid artery, finding no pulse. His face remained professionally composed, but his next words carried unmistakable urgency. "This man will die in the next few minutes without intervention. Get me the AED now, or his death will be a direct result of your obstruction." The statement hung in the cabin like a thunderclap, a clinical assessment transformed into an accusation that no one present could ignore. "I'm a trauma nurse. He knows what he's doing." Isabella's voice rang out as she continued compressions on James's chest. Sweat beaded on her forehead, her professional training evident in every movement. 30 compressions, then 2 breaths. Clear, precise textbook technique. Allison's gaze darted between Elijah and Isabella, her certainty visibly wavering. The presence of another medical professional complicated her stance, but years of rigid adherence to protocol had created deep grooves in her decision-making process. "We still need to follow proper channels," she insisted, though her voice had lost some of its edge. "Lisa, what's taking so long with the captain?" The younger flight attendant hovered at the edge of the scene, clearly torn. "Allison, the captain says to use your judgment, but if there's a physician present—" If Allison emphasized, "That's the issue. We haven't verified." Thomas Miller pushed forward, his weathered face flushed with growing anger. "For God's sake, woman, I've seen hundreds of cardiac arrests in my career. This man is doing everything right, and you're playing games with someone's life." The cabin had begun to divide invisible lines forming between passengers. Jonathan Wells, the businessman in an expensive suit, spoke up from his seat. "The flight attendant is right. Rules are rules. How do we know he's really qualified? Because he's saving a life right in front of us." Shot back an older woman seated nearby. "Open your eyes." Miguel had moved closer, hovering near Elijah, eager to assist. "Dr. Reynolds, can I help? I've been trained on AED use." Elijah nodded once, not wasting words. "Good. When it arrives, you'll prepare the pads while I continue assessment." His tone contained no doubt that the AED would arrive, only a clinical certainty that created its own gravity. Sophia Keller had positioned herself where her phone could capture the entire scene. "This is outrageous," she said loudly, blocking emergency medical care based on what exactly? His appearance. His race. The word race sent a ripple through the cabin. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably. Others exchanged knowing glances. "That's not fair," Jonathan objected. "She's just doing her job, following protocol." "Protocol doesn't mean letting someone die," Thomas fired back. A middle-aged woman in a business suit chimed in. "If he were white with gray hair, would we even be having this conversation?" "That's race baiting," Jonathan retorted. "This is about safety, not race." Allison's cheeks had flushed with a mixture of indignation and growing uncertainty. "This has nothing to do with... I would stop anyone without proper..." "Would you?" Evelyn Nelson's voice cut through the chaos, calm but penetrating. The retired principal fixed Allison with a steady gaze. "Would you have stopped an older white man in a business suit who said he was a doctor? Be honest with yourself, dear." The question landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of discomfort through the cabin. Several passengers looked down at their laps, unwilling to meet anyone's eyes. Isabella, still performing compressions, glanced up with fierce determination. "I've worked with doctors of every background for 15 years. The only thing that matters is this man knows what he's doing, and he's the best chance this patient has." On the floor, James Wilson remained unresponsive, his life literally in the hands of strangers. Eleanor had fallen into a state of shock, her sobs quieter now, but her eyes never leaving her husband's face. "Please," she whispered. "Just save him." Lisa had returned, her face pale. "Allison, the captain, says to defer to any medical professional on board. And..." She hesitated, lowering her voice. "Several passengers have already sent messages about this situation using the in-flight Wi-Fi. It's on Twitter." This news seemed to strike Allison differently than all the arguments before it. The realization that the scene was not contained within the aircraft but was spreading to the outside world shifted something in her expression. Miguel spotted the emergency medical kit in Lisa's hands. "Is the AED in there?" Lisa nodded, but her eyes went to Allison, awaiting permission. The cabin held its collective breath. James Wilson had now been without proper circulation for nearly 3 minutes. The invisible countdown that Elijah had mentioned, 10% less chance of survival with each passing minute, loomed over them all. Allison's mind raced. The situation had spiraled beyond her control. If she continued to block the doctor and James Wilson died, the consequences would be catastrophic for the airline, for her career, and for her conscience. But if she stepped aside and he wasn't really a doctor... The memory of that London flight resurfaced again, but now with new perspective. Was she really protecting the passenger, or was she protecting herself? Was she following protocol, or was she letting fear drive her decisions? And buried beneath it all, a question she couldn't quite face: would she have the same doubts if the doctor looked different? "Allison," Thomas said, his voice gentler now, appealing to her humanity rather than attacking her judgment. Whatever you're worried about, liability procedure, verification, none of it will matter if this man dies, but it will haunt you forever. Trust me on that." Isabella had begun to tire her compressions slightly less forceful. Elijah noticed immediately. "I'll take over again," he said, moving back into position. As they smoothly exchanged places, the practiced choreography of their movements provided visual evidence of their medical training. Elijah resumed compressions with renewed vigor, his eyes finding Allison's. "Ms. Parker," he said, having noted her name tag earlier, "I understand your caution. But right now, I'm the best chance Mr. Wilson has. Let me help him, please." The word "please" not spoken as a plea, but as a professional courtesy between equals, seemed to penetrate Allison's defenses in a way that arguments and accusations had not. A tense moment passed. Then Allison gave a short nod. "Give him the kit, Lisa." Lisa quickly handed the medical kit to Miguel, who opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was the AED, its bright yellow case, instantly recognizable to anyone with emergency training. "Thank you," Elijah said simply, not breaking rhythm with his compressions. But as Miguel was about to remove the AED, Allison's hand shot out, stopping him. "Wait. I still need to see some identification. Some proof you're actually a doctor." The collective groan from the witnesses was audible. Sophia's camera caught Allison's renewed obstruction in high definition. "Are you kidding me?" Thomas exploded. After all this, Elijah didn't react to the renewed challenge, his focus entirely on James. "Isabella, take over compressions again. Miguel, get the AED ready. Expose his chest, prepare the pads." He was no longer asking permission or acknowledging Allison's authority. He had shifted fully into emergency physician mode, where the only hierarchy that mattered was the one that served the patient's survival. Isabella resumed compressions while Elijah reached into his back pocket for his wallet. Without interrupting his assessment of James, he flipped it open to reveal his medical license and hospital ID, holding it up for Allison to see. "Dr. Elijah Reynolds, California Medical License 658723, Chief of Cardiology, Memorial General Hospital," he stated flatly. "Now will you help us save this man's life or continue to obstruct emergency care?" The cabin went silent, all eyes on Allison Parker as the stark choice laid before her. "He's not breathing at all now." Eleanor's voice shattered the momentary silence, her words propelled by pure terror. James's body had gone completely still no longer, even the faintest rise and fall of his chest visible beneath Isabella's continuing compressions. Elijah's fingers pressed against James's carotid artery, finding no pulse. His face remained professionally composed, but his next words carried unmistakable gravity. "Cardiac arrest confirmed. No pulse, no respiration." His gaze locked with Allison's, his voice dropping to a tone that carried both authority and ultimatum. "Step aside, or you will be responsible for a man's death." The statement hung in the cabin like a thunderclap, a clinical assessment transformed into an accusation that no one present could ignore. Passengers visibly recoiled, the reality of the situation hitting them anew. This wasn't merely an argument over procedure. A human being was dying before their eyes. Allison hesitated, her hand still blocking Miguel from removing the AED. Conflict played across her features. Duty versus humanity, procedure versus reality. "I move." Thomas barked, his patience evaporated. For God's sake, woman, Isabella never broke rhythm with her compressions, but her eyes flashed with professional judgment. 4 minutes down. Brain damage begins soon. Miguel held the AED case, his knuckles white with tension. "Please, Ms. Parker. Let me give this to Dr. Reynolds." Eleanor had collapsed into near catatonia, her sobs reduced to quiet whimpers as she clutched her husband's limp hand. "James, don't leave me," she whispered. "Please, don't leave me." Sophia's camera continued recording, capturing the pivotal moment when procedure collided with humanity. "This is negligence," she stated loudly. criminal negligence. Jonathan Wells, who had initially supported Allison, now looked uncertain. Ms. Parker, perhaps we should let the doctor proceed, given the urgency. Evelyn Nelson rose from her seat, her voice ringing with the authority developed through decades as a school principal. Young lady, I've lived long enough to recognize the difference between following rules and hiding behind them. What you're doing right now isn't protecting anyone. It's protecting your own discomfort with trusting this man. The words landed with precision. Allison's eyes widened slightly, something like recognition flickering across her face. In that fractional hesitation, Elijah made his decision. With a swift, deliberate movement, he reached past Allison and took the AED from Miguel's hands. There was nothing aggressive in the action, merely the practiced efficiency of a physician who had determined that further delay was medically unacceptable. Miguel cut open his shirt. Isabella, continue compressions until the AED is ready, he instructed, already opening the device. Allison stepped back, momentarily stunned by the breach of her authority. You can't just... I can, and I am, Elijah replied without looking up. Under Good Samaritan laws and medical ethics, I am obligated to provide emergency care. If you interfere physically, I'll have no choice but to consider it assault. For a split second, Elijah's professional composure cracked, revealing a flash of the frustration and anger that had built over years of being questioned, doubted, and second-guessed because of how he looked. He took a deep breath, centering himself, remembering his oath first, do no harm. The cabin collectively held its breath. Miguel produced a small pair of scissors from the emergency kit and quickly cut through James's shirt, exposing his chest. Isabella maintained compressions, her technique perfect despite growing fatigue. Elijah powered on the AED, its electronic voice filling the cabin with automated instructions. Remain clear of patient, analyzing rhythm. Isabella immediately pulled her hands away from James's chest. Elijah ensured everyone was clear, his training converting to automatic action. The AED's mechanical voice continued. Shock advised. Charging. Stand clear. Everyone back. Elijah commanded his voice, carrying such natural authority that even Allison found herself stepping away. Deliver shock now. Elijah pressed the button. James's body convulsed once as the electrical current passed through his heart, attempting to reset its chaotic rhythm. The passengers watching flinched collectively, several turning away from the confronting reality of resuscitation. Resume CPR. Isabella immediately returned to compressions while Elijah checked for pulse. Still no pulse. Continuing CPR. Eleanor's eyes were fixed on her husband's face, searching for any sign of response. Finding none, she looked up at Elijah with desperate hope. Is it working? Please tell me it's working. Elijah maintained his professional demeanor, but his voice gentled. We're doing everything possible, Mrs. Wilson. The AED will analyze again in 2 minutes. The atmosphere in the cabin had transformed. What had been a confrontation between Allison and Elijah had become a unified effort to save James Wilson's life. Even passengers who had supported Allison's insistence on procedure now watched in tense silence, the reality of mortality overshadowing all other concerns. Allison stood frozen, her training in conflict with the scene unfolding before her. The doctor whose credentials she had questioned was now clearly demonstrating expertise that could not be faked. The nurse whose support she had dismissed was performing textbook CPR. The medical student whose assistance she had blocked was now efficiently setting up the next phase of emergency care. In that moment, the full weight of what she had done, what she had almost prevented, hit Allison with crushing force. This wasn't about procedure or protocol. It was about unconscious bias. She had never confronted assumptions she had never examined. If James Wilson died because of her obstruction, how would she live with herself? Thomas approached her, speaking quietly so only she could hear. It's not too late to help, you know. You can still be part of saving him rather than stopping it. Allison's lips parted, but no words came out. The gravity of her actions or inactions was beginning to settle on her shoulders with crushing weight. The AED voice interrupted again. "Stop, CPR. Analyzing rhythm." Isabella pulled back. Everyone held their breath. "Shock advised. Charging. Stand clear." "Clear," Elijah called out, ensuring no one was touching James. "Deliver shock now." Again, James's body jerked as electricity coursed through it, seeking to convert the chaotic electrical signals of his heart into a coordinated rhythm. This time, after the shock, Elijah's fingers found a pulse. "I've got a pulse," he announced, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of relief. Faint, but present. A collective exhalation swept through the cabin. Eleanor sobbed anew this time with tentative hope. James, can you hear me?" James remained unconscious, but his chest had begun to rise and fall with shallow breaths. Color was slowly returning to his ashen face. "We need to divert to the nearest airport," Elijah stated, looking up at Allison for the first time since taking the AED. "He's stabilized for now, but he needs a hospital immediately. He's had a major cardiac event and requires advanced care." Allison nodded, the fight gone from her posture. "I'll inform the captain." As she turned to go, Evelyn's voice stopped her. "It shouldn't have taken a man nearly dying to do the right thing, dear." Allison didn't respond, but she paused briefly, her shoulders slumping as the truth of the statement sank in. Then her steps quickened as she moved toward the cockpit. With the immediate crisis transitioning from resuscitation to stabilization, the reality of what had just occurred began to settle over the witnesses. Sophia lowered her phone slightly but continued recording. "That was..." She started, then shook her head, unable to find adequate words. "That was prejudice nearly killing someone," Thomas finished for her, his voice carrying clearly through the cabin. No one, not even the passengers who had initially supported Allison, contradicted him. "Maintain airway position," Elijah instructed Isabella as he carefully tilted James's head back, ensuring his tongue wouldn't block his breathing passage. "Miguel, get the oxygen from the kit. We need to increase his saturation levels." Isabella nodded, her movements precise as she monitored James's pulse with 2 fingers pressed to his carotid artery. Pulse is present but weak, around 50 beats per minute. Miguel extracted a portable oxygen mask and tank from the emergency kit, his hands steadier now that he was actively contributing. "Doctor, do you want the non-rebreather mask or the simple face mask?" "Non-rebreather." "Set flow to 15 liters per minute." Elijah answered without hesitation. "We need to maximize oxygenation." The 3 worked in coordinated silence, their movements forming an impromptu but effective medical team. Eleanor watched with tear-streaked face, hope cautiously reborn in her eyes as her husband's chest rose and fell with shallow but present breaths. Thomas had positioned himself as a buffer between the medical team and the rest of the cabin, his paramedic instincts taking over as he created space for them to work. Sophia continued documenting everything, her attorney's mind cataloging each development. Evelyn had moved to sit beside Eleanor, one gnarled hand resting on the younger woman's shoulder in silent support. Around them, passengers watched in hushed fascination the drama of life and death unfolding in a space usually reserved for drink service and in-flight movies. "BP is dropping," Isabella reported using the blood pressure cuff from the medical kit. 90/60 and falling. Elijah's expression remained focused. "Could be shock or continued cardiac dysfunction. We need to elevate his legs slightly to improve venous return." Thomas immediately moved to assist, rolling up a blanket to place under James's feet. "Like this, Dr. Perfect." Elijah attached the oxygen mask over James's face, adjusting the straps with practiced efficiency. "Miguel, monitor his oxygen saturation with the pulse ox. We need to keep it above 90%. The medical student nodded, attaching the small device to James's index finger. "Reading 87% currently, doctor. Increase oxygen to maximum flow, Elijah instructed, and prepare the AED for another analysis in 2 minutes. He's at high risk for rearrest. While the team worked, Allison returned from the cockpit, her face pale. The captain has declared a medical emergency. We're diverting to Denver International. ETA 20 minutes. Emergency services will meet us at the gate. Elijah acknowledged this with a nod, but didn't pause his assessment of James. His cardiac rhythm is still unstable. I need the full list of medications in that kit. Allison hesitated just a fraction of a second before responding. I'll get the complete inventory. As she turned to retrieve it, Lisa approached with a tablet in hand, her expression concerned. Allison, I need to speak with you privately. The senior flight attendant followed Lisa to the galley where a hushed but intense conversation ensued, occasionally punctuated by Allison's sharp, "What?" and "That's impossible." Though the words were indistinct to the cabin, the tone suggested disturbing news. Back with James, Elijah had established a systematic approach to monitoring his tenuous condition. Isabella check vital signs every 2 minutes. Miguel monitor oxygen levels continuously and alert me to any changes. Dr. Miguel said his voice dropping, the patient's saturation is dropping again, down to 85%. Elijah immediately reassessed James's airway. His lips are still cyanotic. Possible pulmonary edema developing. We may need to intubate if his status deteriorates further. Eleanor gripped Evelyn's hand tightly. What does that mean? Is he getting worse? Elijah answered with calm honesty. His heart has suffered significant damage, Mrs. Wilson. We've restored circulation, but his body is still in crisis. We're doing everything possible with the resources available. Thomas leaned closer. Doctor, if you need to intubate, I assisted with field intubations during my service. I can help. Thank you, Elijah, replied genuine appreciation in his voice. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. For a moment, Elijah allowed himself to feel a flash of frustration, not at the situation, but at how much time had been lost in the confrontation with Allison. In cardiac emergencies, minutes mattered. Every second of delay decreased the chances of full recovery. He pushed the thought aside. Regret was a luxury he couldn't afford right now. The AED beeped again, signaling another rhythm check. Everyone clear, Elijah commanded. The cabin fell silent as the device analyzed James's heart rhythm. No shock advised. Continue monitoring. A collective breath of relief whispered through the cabin. Elijah checked James's pulse again. Rate is improving slightly. Up to 60 BPM now. Isabella reported the updated blood pressure. BP stabilizing at 95/65. Oxygen saturation up to 88%, Miguel added. Elijah nodded. Good. He's responding to the oxygen. Keep monitoring closely. Across the cabin, Allison returned from her conversation with Lisa, her expression significantly altered. The confidence and authority she had projected earlier had drained away, replaced by what appeared to be growing dread. She approached Elijah, standing at a respectful distance from where he continued to monitor James. Dr. Reynolds, she began, her voice notably different. I need to inform you that several passengers have already contacted people on the ground about what happened here. Elijah didn't look up. I'm focusing on my patient, Ms. Parker. Public relations concerns are secondary, I understand, but stand. Allison swallowed visibly. The airline's social media team reports that videos are already circulating, and... She lowered her voice. Someone on board recognized Mr. Wilson. He's James Wilson of Wilson Investment Group. His company owns significant shares in our airline. This information, clearly intended to underscore the gravity of the situation for Allison's purposes, seemed to make no impression on Elijah. His identity doesn't change his medical needs. He's a patient requiring emergency care, nothing more or less. From nearby, Sophia spoke up without lowering her phone. What you're witnessing, ladies and gentlemen, is the difference between someone concerned with appearances and someone concerned with saving lives. The comment drew murmurs of agreement from several passengers. Allison's cheeks flushed with humiliation, but she made no retort. Instead, she asked in a subdued voice, "Is there anything else you need for the patient, Doctor?" "Yes," Elijah replied, still focused on James. "I need all passengers except immediate medical assistance to return to their seats. We need space to work, and I need a direct line to the medical team that will meet us in Denver so I can brief them on his condition." Allison nodded. "I'll arrange it immediately." As she moved away, Thomas stepped closer to Elijah. "That was interesting," he observed quietly. Amazing how quickly attitudes change when consequences appear on the horizon. Elijah made a non-committal sound, his attention fixed on the monitors and his patient. "Miguel oxygen stats, holding at 89%. Doctor." "Isabella, another BP check, please." As Isabella took the reading, James's eyelids fluttered slightly, the first independent movement since his collapse. Eleanor gasped, leaning forward. James, can you hear me?" There was no further response, but Elijah noted it. "Good sign. He's showing minimal consciousness. Keep talking to him, Mrs. Wilson. Familiar voices can help." Eleanor took her husband's hand, squeezing gently. "James, it's Ellie. You're going to be okay. There's a wonderful doctor helping you." Across the aisle, Evelyn watched Allison directing other passengers back to their seats, the older woman's eyes sharp with assessment. When Allison passed near her, Evelyn spoke just loudly enough to be heard. "I hope you're reflecting on what almost happened here today because of your assumptions." Allison didn't respond verbally, but her step faltered momentarily before she continued down the aisle. The aircraft had begun its descent into Denver, the slight change in cabin pressure noticeable. Elijah monitored James closely for any adverse reaction to the pressure change. "We're starting our approach to Denver," the captain's voice announced over the intercom. "All passengers, please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Medical personnel may remain with the patient, but secure yourselves as best as possible." Thomas, Isabella, and Miguel exchanged glances, silently confirming they would stay to assist Elijah despite the announcement. "The patient will need to be moved very carefully once we land," Elijah told them. "Any jostling could trigger another arrest. Isabella, be prepared to resume compressions if necessary. Miguel, stay with the AED. Thomas, you'll help stabilize his head and neck during transfer." They all nodded, their impromptu team now functioning with the coordination of professionals who had worked together for years rather than strangers who had met under crisis. The plane began its final descent, the tension in the cabin shifting from the human drama that had unfolded to the mechanical reality of bringing a massive aircraft safely to Earth while a medical emergency continued within. Through it all, Elijah maintained his focus on James Wilson, whose life now depended entirely on the skill and judgment of the doctor who had been blocked from helping him, a truth not lost on anyone who had witnessed the confrontation. As the aircraft's wheels touched down on Denver's runway with a jolt and scream of brakes, James Wilson's hand twitched in his wife's grasp, a small movement perhaps insignificant in medical terms, but to Eleanor it was everything. "He squeezed my hand," she whispered, fresh tears flowing. "He squeezed my hand." Elijah allowed himself the briefest smile, not of pride, but of cautious hope. "Keep holding on, Mr. Wilson," he said to his patient. "Help is almost here." The aircraft taxied rapidly toward the emergency services area, the urgency of their situation evident in their priority clearance. Inside the first-class cabin, Elijah continued his methodical care of James Wilson, his movements precise despite the aircraft's occasional bumps and turns. Oxygen saturation holding at 90%. Miguel reported his eyes fixed on the pulse oximeter. Slight improvement. Isabella checked the blood pressure again. BP 100 over 65 now, still low but more stable. Good. Elijah acknowledged his trained fingers palpating James's peripheral pulses. Radial pulse is weak but detectable. He's maintaining adequate perfusion for now. The medical improvisation required in the confined space of an aircraft would have challenged even experienced emergency physicians. The first-class cabin, designed for luxury rather than life-saving, provided none of the equipment or space that Elijah was accustomed to in Memorial General's state-of-the-art cardiac care unit. Yet he adapted with the fluidity that separates merely competent doctors from exceptional ones, using a folded blanket to elevate James's head at precisely the right angle, repurposing a seat cushion to support the patient's legs, calculating medication dosages in his head when needed. Each action reflected years of training and experience. Eleanor hadn't released her husband's hand since he'd shown that small sign of responsiveness. "James," she continued, speaking to him softly, "we're landing in Denver. You're getting help. The doctor says you're doing better." Thomas positioned himself to stabilize James during landing, his weathered hands gentle but firm on the patient's shoulders. "Almost there," he said quietly. "You've got the best impromptu medical team this side of an actual hospital, sir." Elijah glanced up as the aircraft made its final approach to the gate. "Everyone brace for stopping," he warned. "Isabella, be ready with manual ventilation if his stats drop. Miguel, keep the AED prepped for immediate use." The young medical student nodded, his earlier nervousness replaced by focused determination. "Ready, doctor." Across the aisle, Sophia Keller had finally lowered her phone, though she had continued recording audio. The attorney's expression was a mixture of outrage and professional assessment. She had witnessed not just a potential civil rights violation, but also a textbook example of how unconscious bias could have lethal consequences. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived at Gate B-17, the captain's voice announced over the intercom. "Emergency medical personnel are boarding immediately. Please remain seated with seat belts fastened until they have removed the patient." Elijah used these final moments to prepare James for transport. "Miguel, disconnect the portable oxygen but keep it ready. Isabella, continue monitoring vitals during transfer. Thomas, will need to move him extremely carefully to avoid triggering arrhythmia." Despite his outward calm, Elijah felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him. James Wilson's condition remained precarious, and any number of complications could still arise. The successful resuscitation was just the first step in what would likely be a complex medical journey. For a brief moment, Elijah allowed himself to feel a twinge of anger, not just at Allison's obstruction, but at the system that made such obstruction possible, that made his credentials suspect because of his appearance. It was a familiar anger, one he had managed throughout his career, channeling it into excellence rather than bitterness. He took a deep breath, refocusing on the immediate needs of his patient. The cabin door opened with a pneumatic hiss, and 4 emergency medical technicians in Navy uniforms rushed in, pulling a stretcher. Their movements were swift but controlled, their expressions professionally neutral despite the tension-filled cabin they entered. The lead EMT, a compact woman with cropped gray hair, immediately addressed Elijah. "What's our status?" "Male 64 cardiac arrest, approximately 25 minutes ago." Elijah responded without hesitation. His report, crisp and comprehensive. Initial VFib 3 shocks delivered achieved ROSC after the second. Currently hypotensive at 165 oxygen, sat 90% on supplemental O2. Possible anterior wall MI, no previous cardiac history according to wife. No medications administered due to limited supplies. The EMT nodded, recognizing the precise medical terminology of a physician. "Okay, doctor." "Reynolds." Elijah Reynolds, Cardiology Memorial General. Something flickered in the EMT's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or simply appreciation for having a specialist on scene. "All right, Dr. Reynolds. We'll take it from here, but feel free to continue assistance through transport if you wish." "I'll accompany to the ambulance," Elijah confirmed, already helping position the stretcher alongside James. The transfer from floor to stretcher was executed with careful coordination, every movement calculated to minimize stress on James's compromised cardiovascular system. Eleanor rose with them, refusing to release her husband's hand. "Ma'am," one of the EMTs began, "you'll need to—" "She comes with us," Elijah interrupted quietly but firmly. "She's providing crucial psychological support." The EMT nodded without further question. As they prepared to move, James, his eyelids fluttered again. This time they opened briefly, unfocused, confused, but undeniably conscious. His lips moved beneath the oxygen mask, forming a single word. Eleanor's composure broke entirely. Yes, I'm here, James. I'm right here." The EMTs efficiently secured James to the stretcher. As they began to move him toward the exit, Elijah maintained a hand on his patient's wrist, monitoring his pulse directly. Isabella Thomas and Miguel stepped back, their emergency roles complete, but their investment in James's survival evident in their concerned expressions. Dr. Reynolds' Isabella called out as they reached the door. "Thank you for fighting for him." Elijah gave a simple nod of acknowledgement, his focus still primarily on his patient as they maneuvered the stretcher through the narrow aircraft door. The remaining passengers sat in stunned silence as James was evacuated from the aircraft, the reality of what they had witnessed still settling over them. Some appeared shaken, others contemplative. A few were already on their phones, undoubtedly sharing what they had seen. Allison Parker stood near the galley, her face ashen. The confidence that had fueled her obstruction had drained away entirely, replaced by the dawning horror of recognition, not just of Elijah's expertise, which was now undeniable, but of her own actions and their potential consequences. For a brief moment, her eyes met those of Jonathan Wells, the businessman who had initially supported her adherence to protocol. There was no support in his gaze now, only a troubled awareness of how close they had come to witnessing a preventable death. As the medical team disappeared into the jet bridge with James Wilson, his wife, and Dr. Reynolds, the first-class cabin was left in an uncomfortable silence. The absence of the crisis created space for reflection, for questions, for accountability. Thomas Miller broke the silence first, his voice carrying the weight of decades in emergency services. "I've seen a lot in my career," he said to no one in particular. "But I've never seen someone fight so hard to prevent a qualified doctor from saving a life." Isabella nodded in agreement. His technique was flawless. Textbook advanced cardiac life support, and her eyes flicked toward Allison. "She nearly cost that man his life." "Not nearly," Sophia corrected, her attorney's precision evident. If Dr. Reynolds hadn't insisted on acting despite her obstruction, Mr. Wilson would almost certainly be dead by now. These statements hung in the air, unanswered and unanswerable as the reality of what had transpired settled over everyone present. Outside on the tarmac, emergency lights flashed red and blue against the aircraft's white fuselage, a visual reminder that while the immediate crisis had moved beyond the confines of Flight 427, its impact continued to reverberate among those left behind. "I've got a pulse." Elijah confirmed, his fingers pressed firmly against James Wilson's carotid artery as the stretcher cleared the jet bridge. Weak but steady. Heart rate approximately 65 BPM. The lead EMT, her name tag reading Martinez, nodded sharply. "Good. We've got a cardiac team standing by. ETA to University Medical 3 minutes once we're in the ambulance." Eleanor hurried alongside the stretcher, her hand still clutching her husband's. The terminal had been partially cleared to facilitate their passage, but a few onlookers watched from behind hastily established barriers, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and concern. James's eyes fluttered open again, more alert this time. He blinked in confusion at the ceiling passing above him, then at the oxygen mask covering his face. Eleanor leaned closer. "We're getting you to a hospital. You're going to be okay." His eyes found hers, recognition dawning through the fog of his compromised state. He tried to speak, but the words were muffled by the mask. "Don't try to talk. Elijah advised, still walking alongside the stretcher, one hand maintaining contact with James's pulse point. "Conserve your energy, Mr. Wilson. Your heart has been through a significant event." James's gaze shifted to Elijah, questions evident despite his inability to articulate them. "I'm Doctor," Reynolds. Elijah explained simply. "You experienced cardiac arrest on the flight. We were able to resuscitate you, and you're now stable enough for transport to the hospital." Understanding flickered in James's eyes. He managed a small nod before closing his eyes again, the brief moment of consciousness clearly exhausting him. "Is that normal?" Eleanor asked anxiously. "For him to be awake, and then not again." "Yes," Elijah assured her. "His body is conserving energy. Brief periods of consciousness are a positive sign." They reached the terminal doors where an ambulance waited, its rear doors open. Interior lights bright against the afternoon sky. 2 more medical personnel stood ready to assist with the transfer. Dr. Reynolds, EMT Martinez, said as they approached the ambulance, "Will you be riding with us?" "Yes," Elijah replied without hesitation. "I'd like to ensure continuity of care." Martinez nodded clearly, appreciative. "Welcome aboard, then." As they transferred James into the ambulance, Elijah maintained his professional focus, but his mind registered the significance of the moment. After being questioned, blocked, and doubted on the aircraft, his expertise was now being not just accepted but actively sought. The contrast was stark, though he allowed himself no visible reaction to it. Eleanor climbed into the ambulance after her husband, taking a seat where she could maintain contact with him. Her face showed the emotional toll of the past half hour, tear-streaked makeup, disheveled hair, the haunted look of someone who had glimpsed the possibility of life without their partner. "He's going to need comprehensive cardiac care," Elijah told Martinez as the ambulance doors closed. "Likely an immediate catheterization to determine the extent of blockage, followed by potential stenting or bypass depending on the findings." Martinez nodded, already connecting James to the ambulance's more advanced monitoring equipment. "University Medical has one of the best cardiac centers in the region. Dr. Patel is leading the team waiting for us." The ambulance pulled away from the terminal sirens blaring as it accelerated toward the airport exit. Inside, the medical team worked with practiced coordination to stabilize James for the short but critical journey to the hospital. "BP 105, over 70 now," one of the EMTs reported. "Improving. Oxygen saturation up to 92%, added another." Elijah nodded, allowing himself the first small measure of relief. "His condition is stabilizing. The immediate danger is passing." Eleanor released a shuddering breath, the first tentative hope visible on her face. "So he's going to be okay?" Elijah met her eyes directly, his expression compassionate but honest. "He's responding well to initial treatment, which is very positive, but he's not out of danger yet. His heart has sustained significant stress, and we won't know the full extent of the damage until further tests are completed at the hospital." She nodded, appreciating the candor. "Thank you. For everything. For fighting to help him when—" She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. Elijah understood what she couldn't say when others had tried to prevent him. "I was doing my job, Mrs. Wilson. Nothing more." "No," she disagreed quietly. "You did much more than that. You refused to back down when it would have been easier to do so." The observation struck closer to home than Eleanor could have known. Throughout his career, Elijah had faced moments where backing down would indeed have been easier, when patients questioned his expertise based on his appearance, when colleagues subtly undermined his authority, when hospital visitors assumed he was support staff rather than a department chief. He had never chosen the easier path. Not once. But that choice carried a cost: the constant emotional labor of maintaining professional composure in the face of doubt and dismissal, the energy expended proving his qualifications over and over again. For a moment, the weight of that accumulated burden pressed on him. He felt a flash of exhaustion that went beyond the physical demands of the emergency, a bone-deep weariness from fighting the same battle in different forms throughout his career. The ambulance swerved slightly as it navigated a turn, the driver expertly managing the vehicle's momentum to minimize disruption to the patient. James's monitoring equipment beeped steadily, each sound a confirmation that his heart continued to function. "We're 2 minutes out," Martinez announced. Eleanor squeezed her husband's hand. "Did you hear that, James, almost there?" To everyone's surprise, James's eyes opened again. This time his gaze was clearer, more present. He looked directly at Elijah and with visible effort raised his hand to pull the oxygen mask slightly aside. "You," he managed, his voice barely audible. "You're the one who saved me." Elijah moved the mask back into place gently but firmly. "It was a team effort, Mr. Wilson. Now please conserve your strength." James shook his head slightly, determined to communicate something. He moved the mask again, just enough to whisper, "Thank you." The simple gratitude delivered with such effort carried more weight than elaborate speeches could have. Elijah nodded once in acknowledgement, his professional demeanor softening momentarily. "You're welcome, Mr. Wilson. Now please keep the mask in place. Your heart needs all the oxygen it can get." James complied this time, allowing his eyes to close again. Eleanor mouthed a silent thank you to Elijah over her husband's form. The ambulance slowed as it approached the hospital entrance, where a team in surgical scrubs already waited with a gurney. Through the rear windows, Elijah could see the emergency department entrance illuminated in the afternoon sun, the familiar organized chaos of a major trauma center visible beyond the doors. For the first time since James Wilson had collapsed on Flight 427, Elijah allowed himself to acknowledge the full weight of what had transpired, not just the medical emergency, but the barrier of prejudice that had nearly prevented him from responding to it. The recognition came with no bitterness, just a clear-eyed assessment of a reality he had navigated his entire career. As the ambulance doors opened and the waiting medical team surged forward, Elijah prepared to transfer care to the hospital staff. He would provide them with a complete report, ensure James was in capable hands, and then step back. But as he rose to exit the ambulance, Eleanor caught his sleeve. "You're not leaving, are you? Please stay with us. I trust you." The words "I trust you" stood in stark contrast to the doubt and suspicion he had faced on the aircraft. Coming after what they had all experienced, they carried particular significance. "I'll stay until he's stabilized," Elijah promised, knowing that professional courtesy would allow him limited involvement, even though he had no privileges at this hospital. The transfer to the waiting gurney was executed with practiced efficiency. James was wheeled rapidly into the emergency department, Eleanor hurrying alongside and Elijah following close behind, already preparing the comprehensive medical report he would deliver to the attending physician. Behind them, the ambulance doors closed the vehicle, already preparing to respond to the next emergency. But for James Wilson, his wife, Eleanor, and Dr. Elijah Reynolds, the most critical turning point had already occurred, not just in the medical crisis, but in the human recognition of worth, beyond appearance, of expertise, beyond preconception of value, beyond prejudice. The aircraft's wheels touched down on Denver International's runway with a screech of rubber against concrete, the impact sending a shudder through the cabin. Despite the captain's expert handling, the landing was firmer than usual due to their expedited approach. In first class, the atmosphere remained heavy with tension, even after James Wilson and Dr. Reynolds had been evacuated. Passengers sat in uncomfortable silence, processing what they had witnessed. Some avoided eye contact, while others spoke in hushed tones, describing what they had seen to seatmates who might have missed details in the chaos. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice came over the intercom, "we apologize for the medical emergency and unscheduled landing. We'll be continuing to San Francisco as soon as possible, but we need to complete some paperwork regarding the incident and refuel. Please remain seated for now. Further instructions will follow." Allison Parker stood near the galley, her usual confident posture noticeably absent. She had spent the landing in the rear of the aircraft as far from the first-class passengers as possible. Now necessity brought her back to face those who had witnessed her actions. The professional mask she attempted to maintain couldn't hide the anxiety evident in her tight grip on the service cart handle. Isabella Rodriguez unbuckled her seatbelt and stood stretching muscles tired from performing CPR. "That was," she began, then shook her head, unable to find adequate words. "A disgrace." Thomas Miller supplied his weathered face, creased with lingering anger. "In 40 years of emergency response, I've never seen someone actively try to prevent life-saving care." Miguel Dominguez remained in his seat, his expression still showing traces of the adrenaline rush from participating in a real-life emergency. "Do you think Mr. Wilson will be okay?" He asked no one in particular. "Thanks to Dr. Reynolds, he has a chance," Isabella answered. "If he hadn't insisted on helping—" She left the alternative unspoken. Sophia Keller had been reviewing the video she had captured her attorney's mind, already considering its implications. "This is textbook negligence," she commented loud enough for Allison to hear. "Possibly worse." Evelyn Nelson, who had remained a steady observant presence throughout the crisis, folded her hands in her lap. "What we witnessed wasn't just negligence. It was prejudice in action, the kind that doesn't announce itself with slurs or violence, but with doubt and obstruction, the kind that kills quietly." Her words landed in the cabin like stones, creating ripples of uncomfortable recognition among some passengers. Jonathan Wells, who had initially supported Allison's stance, now looked troubled. "I was wrong," he admitted quietly to the passenger beside him. "I thought she was just following protocol, but the doctor clearly knew what he was doing. I wonder if I would have questioned him if—" He trailed off, unwilling to complete the thought aloud. Lisa, the younger flight attendant who had seemed torn throughout the confrontation, approached Allison. "The captain wants to speak with you," she said quietly. "And there are messages from headquarters." Allison nodded stiffly, her complexion pale beneath her makeup. "I'll go immediately." As she turned to leave, Thomas called out, "Ma'am, I'd like to know something." Allison paused, visibly bracing herself. "Would you have stopped a white doctor from helping?" Thomas asked bluntly, his voice carrying through the cabin. "Would you have demanded credentials if Dr. Reynolds had been an older white man in a business suit?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable in any honest way that wouldn't condemn her. Allison's lips parted, but no words emerged. After a moment of painful silence, she continued toward the cockpit without responding. "That's answer enough," Sophia remarked, still recording. What neither Thomas nor Sophia could see was the storm of conflicting emotions behind Allison's carefully maintained facade. As she walked to the cockpit, memories flashed through her mind, the London flight that had shaped her rigid adherence to protocol. Yes, but also more personal memories she rarely acknowledged. Growing up in a small Minnesota town where the only doctor had been an older white man with silver hair and a commanding presence. Her father's dismissive comments about affirmative action hires whenever they saw professionals who didn't fit his preconception of authority. The unconscious comfort she felt when dealing with people who matched her mental image of expertise, and the subtle, unexamined discomfort when they didn't. For perhaps the first time, Allison confronted the uncomfortable possibility that her actions had been driven not just by protocol, but by deep-seated biases she had never fully acknowledged even to herself. The realization was devastating. Outside the aircraft windows, emergency vehicles were dispersing their lights, no longer necessary now that the patient had been transported. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the tarmac, the mundane airport activities continuing despite the life-and-death drama that had just unfolded. Inside the terminal, airline representatives were already gathering their expressions serious as they consulted tablets and phones. Through the windows, passengers could see men and women in corporate attire arriving, the airline's damage control mechanism activating. Isabella moved to sit beside Eleanor's empty seat, gathering the personal items the distraught woman had left behind in her rush to accompany her husband. She left her purse, she noted, carefully collecting a designer handbag and a cashmere wrap, and her phone. "I'm sure the airline will arrange to get them to her at the hospital," Thomas said, then added with evident skepticism, "assuming they're capable of doing anything right at this point." Miguel had been checking his own phone. "It's already on social media," he reported, his voice a mixture of awe and concern. Someone uploaded a clip of the flight attendant blocking Dr. Reynolds. "It's getting thousands of shares." Sophia nodded without surprise. "The public response will be swift." "As it should be. But will it change anything?" Evelyn asked, her voice carrying the weariness of someone who had seen many moments of outrage followed by little substantive change. "Will the next black doctor be believed? Will the next patient be saved without a fight?" No one had an answer for her. The cabin door opened again, and a man in an airline executive uniform entered, his expression grave. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Anthony Bridges, Denver Operations Manager. I want to personally apologize for any distress caused by today's incident. We're gathering information and will be taking appropriate action." His practiced corporate response fell flat in a cabin where passengers had just witnessed a man nearly die due to an airline employee's actions. "Appropriate action," Thomas repeated incredulously. "A man nearly died because one of your employees refused to let a qualified doctor help him. What exactly would you consider appropriate in this situation?" The executive's practiced smile faltered slightly. "Sir, I assure you, we take passenger safety extremely seriously." "No, you don't," Sophia interrupted, standing to face him. "I have video evidence of your senior flight attendant physically preventing a cardiology specialist from administering life-saving care. As an attorney, I can tell you that constitutes negligence at minimum and potentially rises to the level of a civil rights violation." Anthony Bridges' expression shifted from corporate reassurance to genuine concern. "Ma'am, perhaps we could discuss this privately?" "No," Sophia replied firmly. "There will be nothing private about this. Your employee's actions were witnessed by an entire cabin of passengers, and now they're being viewed by thousands online. Transparency is your only option at this point." Evelyn Nelson spoke up, her voice carrying the quiet authority of decades in education. "Young man, your airline has a much bigger problem than a PR crisis. You have a culture that enabled a woman to look at a black physician and decide he couldn't possibly be qualified to save a life." The executive's discomfort was increasingly evident. "Ma'am, I can assure you that our airline does not tolerate discrimination of any kind." "Then why?" Isabella asked sharply. "Did your senior flight attendant immediately accept the word of an older white paramedic, but refuse to believe a black cardiologist?" The pointed question hung in the air. Several passengers nodded in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably, perhaps recognizing their own unconscious biases reflected in the confrontation they had witnessed. Before the executive could formulate a response, Lisa returned from the cockpit, her expression grim. "Mr. Bridges, the captain says you're needed immediately. There's FBI agents at the gate. They're asking to board." A ripple of murmurs spread through the cabin. Miguel's eyes widened. "FBI. Is this that serious?" Sophia nodded. "Obstruction of emergency medical care that could have resulted in death, potentially motivated by racial bias." "Yes, it's that serious." Anthony Bridges' professional composure cracked entirely. "FBI already. But I need to make some calls." He turned abruptly and hurried toward the jet bridge, any pretense of controlled crisis management abandoned. Thomas leaned toward Sophia. "FBI involvement. This quickly seems unusual. How would they even know about this?" "Yet." Sophia glanced at her phone. "The video I recorded has over 50,000 views already. Someone tagged the Civil Rights Division. And Mr. Wilson isn't just any passenger, he's a major donor to several political campaigns and has connections throughout Washington. Things move quickly when certain people are involved." Outside the windows, passengers could now see several individuals in dark suits approaching the aircraft. Their purposeful stride and serious expressions were visible even from a distance. Inside the cabin, Allison had returned from the cockpit, her face ashen. She moved mechanically through her duties, avoiding eye contact with passengers, particularly those who had been most vocal during the confrontation. The aircraft door opened again, and 3 individuals entered, 2 men and a woman, all in professional attire that unmistakably identified them as federal agents. "Good afternoon," the woman said, her voice carrying natural authority. "I'm Special Agent Teresa Ramirez with the FBI Civil Rights Division. These are Agents Collins and Hernandez. We're here to gather information about an incident that occurred on this flight." Allison Parker froze in the galley, a stack of incident report forms clutched in her trembling hands. Agent Ramirez surveyed the cabin with practiced efficiency. "We understand there was a medical emergency during which a physician may have been prevented from providing care. We'll need statements from all witnesses, beginning with the flight crew." Her gaze settled on Allison, who seemed to shrink under the scrutiny. "Are you Allison Parker, senior flight attendant on this flight?" Allison nodded mutely. "Ms. Parker, we'll need to speak with you first. Is there a private area where we can conduct an interview?" Before Allison could respond, Sophia stood. "Agent Ramirez. I'm Sophia Keller, attorney. I have video documentation of the entire incident which I'm prepared to provide to your investigation." Agent Ramirez nodded. "Thank you, Ms. Keller. We'll review your evidence." She turned back to Allison. "Ms. Parker, please come with us." As Allison was escorted toward the front of the aircraft, the gravity of the situation settled over the remaining passengers. What had begun as a medical emergency had evolved into something far larger, a moment when unconscious bias had been exposed in the most consequential way possible, with a man's life hanging in the balance. Outside, the afternoon sun continued its arc across the Colorado sky, indifferent to the human drama unfolding beneath it. Inside University Medical Center, James Wilson fought for recovery with Dr. Reynolds still by his side, and on Flight 427 the reckoning had only just begun. "I'm Special Agent Teresa Ramirez with the FBI Civil Rights Division," the woman announced, her voice carrying natural authority throughout the first-class cabin. Standing at 5'8", with her dark hair pulled back in a professional bun, Agent Ramirez exuded the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to handling sensitive investigations. The 2 agents flanking her, Collins, a broad-shouldered black man in his 40s, and Hernandez, a younger Hispanic man with watchful eyes, surveyed the cabin with practiced observation. "We're here to investigate reports of obstruction of emergency medical care with potential civil rights implications," Agent Ramirez continued. "We understand a physician may have been prevented from providing life-saving treatment during a medical emergency on this flight." The cabin had gone completely silent, the gravity of federal agents boarding the aircraft landing heavily on everyone present. Airline executives who had been attempting to manage the situation stood frozen, their damage control protocols clearly not designed for this level of escalation. Allison Parker had retreated to the galley, her face ashen, her hands visibly trembling as she clutched a stack of incident report forms. The confident authority she had projected earlier had vanished entirely, replaced by evident fear. Sophia Keller rose from her seat, phone in hand. "Agent Ramirez. I'm Sophia Keller, attorney. I documented the entire incident." The senior flight attendant physically blocked Dr. Elijah Reynolds, a cardiology specialist, from providing emergency care to a passenger in cardiac arrest. When he identified himself as a physician, she demanded credentials and stated, and I quote, "We need a real doctor." Agent Ramirez nodded, her expression remaining neutral but attentive. "Thank you, Ms. Keller. We'll need to review that documentation and take your formal statement." She turned to address the broader cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay to your journey. We'll need to interview key witnesses, but we'll try to be as expedient as possible." Thomas Miller stood from his seat. "I'm a retired paramedic, Agent Ramirez. I witnessed the entire incident and can confirm Ms. Keller's account. Dr. Reynolds was performing textbook CPR and requested the AED, which was delayed due to Ms. Parker's obstruction. Isabella Rodriguez joined him. I'm a trauma nurse. I assisted Dr. Reynolds once he was finally allowed to access emergency equipment. Without his intervention, Mr. Wilson would almost certainly not have survived. Miguel Dominguez raised his hand tentatively. I'm a medical student. I also helped Dr. Reynolds. He knew exactly what to do, but Ms. Parker wouldn't let him help until it was almost too late. Agent Ramirez listened attentively, her notepad already open as she documented these initial statements. We appreciate everyone's willingness to provide information. Agent Hernandez will collect contact details from all passengers in first class so we can follow up for formal statements. Right now, we need to speak with Ms. Parker and review Ms. Keller's video evidence. Agent Collins had moved to where Allison stood in the galley, his notepad already open. Ms. Parker, I'll need to speak with you privately. Allison's gaze darted around as if seeking escape, but finding none. I was following protocol, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We have procedures for medical emergencies. We'll discuss those procedures in detail. Agent Collins replied, his tone professional but unyielding. Is there a location where we can speak privately? The airline's Denver operations manager, Anthony Bridges, attempted to reassert control of the situation. Agents, perhaps we could facilitate these interviews at our offices in the terminal. I'm sure passengers are eager to continue their journey to San Francisco. Agent Ramirez turned toward him, her expression unchanged, but her tone carrying a subtle edge. Mr. Bridges, this investigation takes precedence over flight schedules. We'll conduct our preliminary interviews here where witnesses' memories are freshest and before they disperse. Bridges nodded quickly, recognizing the futility of further protest. Of course. We'll cooperate fully. As the manager retreated to make arrangements, Evelyn Nelson spoke up from her seat. Young lady, she addressed Agent Ramirez. I hope you understand what really happened here. This wasn't just about rules or procedures. This was about a black doctor not fitting someone's image of what a doctor should look like. Agent Ramirez met the older woman's gaze. Ma'am, we're investigating all aspects of this incident, including potential bias motivations. The airline employees present visibly tensed at this statement, the implication of a civil rights investigation clearly more concerning to them than a simple procedural review. Lisa, the younger flight attendant, who had appeared conflicted throughout the incident, approached Agent Ramirez. Ma'am, I was also working first class during the incident. I think you should know that I tried to give Dr. Reynolds the emergency kit sooner, but I was instructed not to. This new information drew Agent Ramirez's focused attention. And who gave you that instruction, Miss Lisa Turner? It was Ms. Parker. She said we needed to verify his credentials first, but the passenger was clearly in distress. I didn't know what to do. Her voice trembled slightly. I should have acted anyway. Agent Ramirez nodded, making a note. We'll need your formal statement as well, Miss Turner. Sophia had connected her phone to a tablet she carried in her briefcase, allowing her to show the video on a larger screen. Agent Ramirez, would you like to review the footage now? I've cued it to the critical moment when Ms. Parker physically blocked Dr. Reynolds. Yes, please, Agent Ramirez replied, moving to where she could view the screen. The tablet displayed the scene that had unfolded earlier. Elijah identifying himself as a cardiologist, Allison placing her hand on his shoulder to stop him, the critical exchange where she stated, "Anyone can claim to be a doctor. We follow procedure." The video continued, capturing the escalation, Elijah's repeated requests for the AED, and finally the moment when he took decisive action, despite Allison's obstruction. As the footage played, passengers who had not witnessed the entire confrontation from their seats gasped at the clear documentation of what had transpired. Agent Ramirez watched without visible reaction, her professional training evident in her neutral expression. When the video concluded, she simply said, "Thank you, Ms. Keller. This will be crucial evidence in our investigation. I'll need a copy." Of course, Sophia agreed, already preparing to transfer the file. Anthony Bridges, who had also viewed the footage, appeared visibly shaken. "I want to assure you, Agent Ramirez, that what you've just witnessed does not reflect our airline's policies or values. We are committed to passenger safety above all else." "Then, perhaps you can explain?" Agent Ramirez replied, "Why your senior flight attendant prevented a clearly qualified physician from providing emergency care to a passenger in cardiac arrest." Bridges had no immediate answer. In the front galley, Agent Collins' interview with Allison had taken an intense turn. Though their conversation wasn't audible to the cabin, Allison's body language communicated increasing distress. At one point, she covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking in what appeared to be silent sobs. Throughout the cabin, passengers exchanged glances, the shared witness experience creating an unusual bond among strangers. Some appeared uncomfortable, perhaps recognizing similar biases within themselves. Others seemed righteously indignant, their sense of justice inflamed by what they had observed. Agent Hernandez moved methodically through the cabin, collecting contact information and brief preliminary statements from each passenger. When he reached Evelyn Nelson, the older woman fixed him with a direct gaze. "Young man, I've lived long enough to recognize prejudice when I see it." That flight attendant looked at Dr. Reynolds and decided he couldn't possibly be what he claimed. "I've watched that same scenario play out for 70 years, just with different settings and characters. The only difference today was that someone's life hung in the balance." Agent Hernandez nodded, making detailed notes. "Thank you for your perspective, ma'am. It will be included in our report." Jonathan Wells, who had initially supported Allison, now appeared deeply troubled. When Agent Hernandez reached him, he spoke quietly. "I need to admit that I initially thought the flight attendant was just following procedure. I didn't consider that bias might be involved until I saw how differently she responded to the white paramedic versus the black doctor. I'm not proud of that." After approximately 30 minutes of preliminary investigation, Agent Ramirez addressed the cabin again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've gathered enough initial information to proceed with our formal investigation. We'll be taking statements from Ms. Parker and key witnesses at our Denver office. The rest of you may continue to your destination. FBI agents in San Francisco may contact you for additional statements upon your arrival." She turned to Anthony Bridges. "Mr. Bridges will need Ms. Parker to accompany us for further questioning." The airline executive nodded stiffly. "Of course. We'll arrange for a replacement crew member for the continuation of the flight." Agent Collins emerged from the galley with Allison, whose mascara had run down her cheeks in dark streaks. She kept her gaze fixed on the floor, unable to meet the eyes of the passengers who had witnessed her actions. As the agents prepared to escort Allison from the aircraft, Thomas approached Agent Ramirez. "What happens now?" he asked. "We'll conduct a thorough investigation," she replied. "The Civil Rights Division takes these matters extremely seriously, especially when they involve potential discrimination in the provision of emergency medical services," and Ms. Parker, Agent Ramirez, maintained her professional demeanor. "That will depend on the findings of our investigation and the determination of federal prosecutors. Obstruction of emergency medical care is a serious offense, particularly when it could have resulted in loss of life. If bias is determined to be a motivating factor, additional charges may apply." As Allison was escorted from the aircraft, the reality of how quickly a routine flight had transformed into a federal civil rights investigation settled over everyone present. What had begun as a medical emergency had exposed something far more pervasive, the quiet, often unacknowledged prejudice that could manifest in life-or-death situations. Outside the aircraft windows, the afternoon sun continued its arc across the Colorado sky, indifferent to the human drama unfolding beneath it. Inside University Medical Center, James Wilson fought for recovery with Dr. Reynolds still by his side. And on Flight 427, a reckoning had begun that would extend far beyond a single flight or a single airline. On Flight 427, a heart stopped beating, and in that critical moment when prejudice threatened to claim a life, we witnessed something profound: the power of expertise and determination in the face of bias. Dr. Elijah Reynolds did more than save James Wilson. He forced us to confront an uncomfortable truth that assumptions about who can possess knowledge and skill can have life-or-death consequences. Through his unwavering insistence on providing care despite obstruction, he demonstrated that excellence must be recognized regardless of appearance. The Reynolds Protocol now ensures that any qualified medical professional can render emergency aid without unnecessary barriers. But beyond aviation, this incident challenges each of us to examine our own assumptions about expertise and authority in all aspects of life. If you witness prejudice standing between someone and their ability to contribute their skills, whether in a crisis or in everyday situations, will you remain silent? Or will you recognize, as we all saw on Flight 427, that excellence has no color and courage has no limits? Thank you for watching this powerful story. If it moved you as much as it did us, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with others. Your support helps us continue to bring these important stories to light. Remember, change begins when we recognize the biases that exist within our systems and within ourselves.